right. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you guys today? I am going to share my screen here with you. Let me get in here. And then we are going to start. Carrie, can you give me the communication text to let me know that everything's good? You can hear me. You can see my screen. Then I know we're ready to rock. Excellent. Okay. So of course, the big question everyone has today is what type of insect will bother Dr. Sullivan today? And what I'm really hoping is that the answer is none. I am not interested in any of you bugs coming into my lifestyle today. We've had a praying mantis. I don't know if I had a wasp or a yellow jacket last time, but no thank you. It will be actually hilarious if anything like that happens today. And I'm sure you'll hear me squeal and scream and thank you guys so much for joining us. I've really been looking forward to meeting with you today. I think today is a very important lecture. It's very important to understand sleep. And it's a funny thing because we're sleeping when we're sleeping, or we're trying to sleep when we're supposed to be sleeping. And so there's a lot of mystery around what should we do? How do we know when it goes wrong? And it's such a crazily important part of your recovery that if you don't know this information, as always, I'm afraid you're not going to make the best recovery that you can. So let's go through a recap of last week in case you weren't here, or if you were. Hopefully these were the nuggets that you got out of it. Rule number 4 was to harness your creative power, to use your creativity and the power of your mind to enhance your recovery, the power of your thoughts. So based on the last session, I hope that you were inspired to bring your creative spirit to your recovery. And we talked about how engaging in creative activity after a stroke leads to physical strengthening between brain connections and supports emotional healing. So it's a twofer. You get a 2-for-1. Different types of art, different types of aesthetics, different types of creative activity stimulate different parts of our brain. And in that sense, it is an ingredient for neuroplasticity. Creative therapies allow for the nonverbal and symbolic communication and expression and can really help get stuff that might muck you up if it stays inside you out, okay? As you all know, I have not had a stroke, so I truly can't appreciate the complexity of the emotions and the journey. But what I very strongly feel confident about is that it's a lot in all different ways. And so being a psychologist, I just really believe that it's much healthier to get those things out of you than to have them weigh on you. Okay. You don't need to be an artist to benefit from art therapy. You don't need to be a musician. You can be completely tone deaf, colorblind. It really doesn't matter. The key is to find a creative activity that feels good to you that you're going to stick with. When you decide to bring creativity into your recovery, I really feel that you are giving yourself a gift, not necessarily focusing so much on the physical part of your recovery or even what you can see that gets better. This is about yourself, your emotional self, your spiritual self, your soul, right? Who you are as a person who is underneath all of the stroke recovery. And I think it can be really good for you because it can bring a certain spontaneity to your recovery. It can bring just kind of a lightness. There can be so much that's heavy and, you know, intense about recovering from a stroke. And I think art offers us a way to kind of be a little bit more playful, can bring a sense of awe, peace, wonder, and connection. There's so much about art that is really about the human experience, whether or not it's through times of sorrow and struggle, or whether it's through times of exaltation and being just completely amazed by nature or, you know, God's world, that it's important for us to connect with those things as well. So what we talked about was all the different creative powerhouses to heal your brain. We talked about the power of cooking, music therapy, looking at art, journaling, writing, spending time in prayer or meditation. We also talked about mental imagery and how cool it is that the same parts of your brain that are used when you actually do something like move your hand open and close are the same parts of your brain that get stimulated when you just imagine it. So in that sense, we can actually do therapy to ourselves just in our mind, just in our mental abilities. It's not even something that has to be a physical manifestation or something that we can see. We also talked about mirror box therapy. I wonder if any of you pursued that. I certainly think it is worthy of getting one, relatively low cost, something that has a lot of scientific support behind it. So what we're going to talk about tonight is Rule 5. This is prioritize sleep. Remember, our enriched environment is always our model. Hard work of rehab, but we have to balance it with in-depth, quality, quantity, rest, and sleep. And what we're going to talk about tonight is the importance of long periods of uninterrupted, high-quality sleep. I just spoke with someone today who sleeps from about 1 a.m. to 4 p.m. nightly, gets up around 5, maybe dozes off again from about 6 to 6:30, and that's it. Maybe if he's lucky, 4 hours of sleep a night. Not good enough, not going to get as well as he possibly could because of his sleep. Even though he's working his butt off in therapy, it will not be as fruitful if he is also not balancing that with high quality sleep. So what we know, this is absolutely true through decades and decades of scientific writing, is that sleep is a staple, a foundation of physical, mental, and brain health. Why does sleep matter? I always like to make sure you guys know what is on the line with these rules. Well, sleep disorders, which you're going to learn all about today, are very dangerous to you all as stroke survivors because they can reduce the amount of oxygen that's getting to your brain. And think about it, that's essentially what's hurt you from your stroke, is brain cells in your brain didn't get enough blood, didn't get enough oxygen to stay alive. It can increase your blood pressure, which is the #1 risk factor for a stroke. It can absolutely worsen your cognitive symptoms, your speech, your memory, your attention. Can absolutely worsen your emotional symptoms. Anyone is going to be irritable, short-tempered, a little bit on edge when they're not sleeping well. And then you add the strain of a stroke on top of that. And we also know it strains your heart when you don't sleep good, which is pretty interesting, actually. When you don't sleep good, you're basically setting the stage for depression. And we know that rates of post-stroke depression are very, very high, even when people are sleeping well. So much of how I think about the brain is in layers, and that there's many things that contribute to one problem. And we can't just deduce it down to one thing, like it's the stroke damage that you're struggling with. Very often there's layers that kind of sit up on top of the stroke that make a problem worse. And I've seen it time and time again that sleep is one of these biggest problems. And really why it matters so much is because it's a problem that can be identified and treated. So let's just say someone has a symptom of difficulty with short-term memory. And there's a layer of that that is stroke. And there's a layer of that that is untreated sleep problem. And that together makes up that person's experience of a short-term memory problem. Well, if we can take off some of that layer, and now instead of it being a 8 out of a 10 problem, now maybe we can actually make the memory problem a 4 out of a 10, right? Okay, so we can take away severity when we take serious that people's symptoms are multifactorial. They are coming from multiple places. They are not just reduced down to their one medical problem. When you don't sleep, you're at very high risk for nighttime falls. And this worries me because one thing we absolutely know about the brain is the more it gets injured, the less able it is to recover. This is why it's so key that everyone pays attention to their balance problems, okay? Anything that makes you unsteady on your feet, you have to take that very serious, because if you've had a stroke, now we're going to add a traumatic brain injury on there. You will not recover from that brain injury as well as you would have if you didn't have a stroke. It's common sense, right? If you break your hand once, it has a certain degree of chance of fully recovering. Well, what happens if you break that hand in the same place twice? Not gonna recover so good, right? So we always wanna make sure with our brain injury loved ones that we are very, very good about protecting their brain really for the rest of their life. And it can absolutely slow your recovery, can reduce your recovery. Good sleep, quality and quantity, enhances your ability to recover because it promotes chemical, physical, and emotional healing. And this happens through the processes of neuroprotection and neuroplasticity. So we got to get into all that good stuff tonight. Sleep occupies about a third of our lives, yet we're really just figuring out as a scientific community what is the purpose of sleep. So why would evolution select that, ideally 7 to 9 hours a night we go unconscious? That's quite a high vulnerability. Well, what we know is that this time is needed for biological restoration. And what scientists think is that it has a lot to do with the brain. So when we sleep, we are actually more active biologically than most times when we're awake. And what we're doing when we're asleep is a lot. We have two immune systems in our body, slightly different. One that handles everything from the blood-brain barrier down, and we have one that is specialized for the brain. Both of these immune systems go wild when we're sleeping, but we know that they do somewhat different things. The immune system in the body is very focused on restoration, doing things like growing muscles, growing tissues, repairing tissues, synthesizing proteins, releasing growth hormone, all these different things that we need in order for our body to restore from the wear and tear and be ready to face another day. But we know in the brain, there's very specialized cells that are going around clearing out all sorts of debris. Kind of think of it like a recycling that needs to be taken out, because we also want to have fresh ground to be able to replant new neurons, new dendrites, all that neuroplastic stuff that we want to happen. It's a process of cleaning out the old to make room for the new. We know that sleep is a biological necessity. You need sleep in order to survive. Animals have been deprived of sleep in scientific experiments, and after just a week, they start to have things like weight loss, and ultimately they die from infections because the body just doesn't have that repair and restoration time. So when we're sleeping every night, especially when we can get into good quality REM sleep, it's basically cleanup time in the brain, okay? There is a crew in there, you can think of it that way, that are working really hard, especially after a stroke, to break down all of the damage. So when a brain cell dies, it doesn't just evaporate. It has all sorts of contents, mitochondria, all the different parts of the cell, the blood that was released from that part of the brain cell breaking off from other brain cells. There's a lot of stuff that gets left behind. And the way the brain's immune system gets rid of it is it has all sorts of cells that chop it up into little pieces. And then basically we can flush it out of our body, or it gets reabsorbed by healthy surrounding blood tissue, okay? This bad stuff has to get out, or else it fills up all the spaces where we want the neuroplasticity to happen, where we want the new brain cells to be able to come in, the new dendrites that we want to build off one of the brain cells that surrounds it, and we want it to grow so we can touch another accompanying brain cell. When we are sleeping, what we're really doing when we haven't had a stroke is cleaning out something called adenosine. And this is basically a byproduct of cells working, right? Kind of think of it like the smoke that comes out of a furnace. So the buildup of this chemical, adenosine, is thought to be one factor that makes us feel sleepy during the day. And as long as we're awake, this adenosine is accumulating and accumulating. During sleep, that's when that immune system can clear it out, and we can wake up feeling more alert because it's been cleared, okay? Incomplete clearing when we're not sleeping well results in inflammation. And if you have been with us this whole time, I hope you are very well aware of how important open, healthy, elastic blood vessels are to the brain. They're the most important thing. And one thing that can make blood vessels get smaller and more tight, not allowing as much blood to get through, is inflammation. We desperately want your blood vessels to be wide open as much as they possibly can be in the brain, okay? One thing that's interesting is that genes play a role in how much of this adenosine actually builds up in the brain and how efficiently the brain's immune system can clear it out. And that's probably why some people are just natural born light sleepers and can really get by on 6 hours. And the rest of us are a little bit more like on the 9-hour side. It's just a difference in efficiency, which is really interesting to me. One thing that we know blocks this chemical is caffeine. And so again, there's also different efficiencies that the brain has with how much caffeine people need. So probably people who need like 2-3 cups of coffee a day I would suspect are people that maybe struggle to clear out this adenosine, and they need more help with kind of suppressing it so that they can stay alert. Brain repair mechanisms are activated during deep sleep. And think of it like now, after we've cleared things out, we want to put in fresh organic soil so that the new seeds of new brain cells or these new connections can be planted. So really what deep sleep helps our brain do, take out the junk and make room for the new plantings. The other thing that we do during sleep, which is absolutely fascinating, is this is where we make our memories. If we had to remember every single thing that we go through every day, we would be hideous. Our heads would be huge. Our brain has to decide what was the essential learning point of this day, what is important to my survival to remember. And how it does this is during the day, we temporarily store a whole lot of memories in our brain. But during slow wave sleep at night, two different parts of the brain are basically showing movies to each other all night. The memory centers of the brain, which is called the hippocampus, there's one on each side right about here, kind of deep in, and the frontal cortex are comparing notes with their movies all night and making decisions about what to keep and what could be forgotten. Isn't that interesting? And what it really cares about is anything that has a threatening quality to it, or any type of skill that you're repetitively doing to try to learn. And the reason that that is because they're both related to survival, okay? What the brain cares about is keeping you alive, first and foremost, and then it wants you to get better at the things you're studying because we want to become masters of things that help us survive, okay? So during different types of sleep, we are learning and keeping different types of memory. So when we're in REM sleep, that's very much the time where we are going through our emotional stuff, our traumatic stuff, and also procedural learning, which is where we're learning to do a new complex task. If you were with us, I think it was 2 meetings ago, I talked about the research study that they did where they first learned about this, where they had a group of college students playing a video game where they were learning to ski. And they had one group take a nap and the other group stay awake. And the group that took a nap woke up and were like a lot better than the group that wasn't allowed to sleep. And they did a similar thing with mice, and they could figure out with electrodes that when the mouse was in REM sleep, all it was doing was replaying, going through a maze over and over again. They could actually trace the firing of the brain cells were exactly the same as when the mouse was actually going through the maze. So we deduced that the mouse, when it was sleeping, was just running the maze over and over and over. And each time it did it, the brain is learning a little bit more about, you know, corners that could be cut, or maybe a more efficient way of moving its leg or coordinating its limbs so it could get further quicker. And so in this REM sleep, you are probably running through your physical therapy activities over and over again. So the point here is if you're not getting REM sleep, you're not getting that extra boost of rehearsal, and it's less likely to really, really stick into the memory banks. I think that that is just totally fascinating. So the thing the brain really cares about, though, is how does the day's events mesh with the life memories, the life history of the person, okay? And so once it decides that something is worthy, there was a lesson learned, it then picks that memory and moves it, literally physically moves it into long-term memory, which are stored in all of the gray matter that's on the outside of our brain, the cortex. Isn't that so interesting? That's what the gray matter is. It's just a library for memories that we have decided are important enough to remember. I thought that was so interesting. So this review process applies to your therapy exercises, like I said. Any type of emotional conflict or stress that we go through during the day, that's very much prioritized when we sleep and we review and we review. Unexpected daily events, anything that isn't a good fit with what we thought was going to happen. Because when there's any kind of difference or incongruence in the brain's like, wait a second, that doesn't fit. Let's go over that one extra because I need to figure out what happened, because anything that slips by me is potentially a threat, right? So if you really just, you know, get that through our heads, that the whole purpose of DNA is to survive and to be able to stay alive long enough to replicate. You know, it's kind of sad to think of it that way, but that's the push of evolution. And so we want to know when anything is threatening, or maybe is going to take more of our resources than we're really able to give. So as we go through things over and over and over, this is learning. And what this is called is consolidation. And that's not just, you know, I can remember. The remembering is because you've grown new brain cells, you've grown new axons, dendrites, synapses, all those little, like in my little picture here, you see those little leaves, all of those little connectors that are going to make the brain cells be able to communicate better. That's what happens when you learn. That's why it's so important to make sure that in addition to trying to, you know, survive this recovery, you are also doing a lot of new learning, because that is neuroplasticity in practice, okay? A sleepy brain is a much slower and much more impulsive brain, okay? So when we don't sleep, our ability to learn new information drops by about 40%. That is a lot. We often see the biggest impact on the ability to concentrate and response time, okay? So I wanna ask you, are those two things that you feel like you need in this recovery? Do you need to be able to concentrate? Yep. Do you need to be able to stay in time with your therapist or stay in time with therapies? You really do. When your processing speed is slow, excuse me, it's very easy to not get in enough of those repetitions that we need to really have the best recovery. So we want to try to enhance processing speed wherever we can. When sleep problems go on for a long time, we start to see bigger cognitive problems like word finding, memory mistakes, impulsivity, and not so good judgment. Okay, so a very classic memory mistake we make when we are chronically sleep deprived is that we remember things, but we get the context screwed up. So we might remember that we had a brownie sundae last week, but we think we got it from Dairy Queen when really we got it from Carvel. Okay, now any of you who are from the Northeast, you know all about Carvel, right? I grew up in New Jersey, so we had a lot of Carvel. You remember the information, but you kind of just get the specifics a little bit messed up, okay? Sleep is not just good for making the memories. It's not just good for restoring, you know, brain soil. It's very, very important for the emotional healing. So remember, I said before, we take the day's events and we try to mesh it with our life story, okay? How does something like a stroke fit in our life history? And there is a difference in people's expectation about stroke when it comes to emotional healing. So this is a truism as it relates to all kinds of trauma, okay? So the more you expect something is going to happen, in a way, it's less traumatic. The things that are most traumatic to people is when it came completely out of the blue. So one way to make this point is to share with you some research on car accidents, okay? You might think when people get hit head on, that they are more traumatized than when they get hit from behind because they can see it coming, right? That feels really scary, of course. And of course, both are completely traumatic. But the research has shown us time and time again, the people that get hit from behind without any thought, visual, anything that it was coming, actually have more instances of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's because even if in a blink of an eye, you can see the truck coming for you, believe it or not, there's a bracing that can happen and you can kind of guard a little bit. When you feel like you were hit without any expectation, you have your guard completely down and relaxed, that is actually more traumatic. And again, I'm not trying to pit trauma against trauma. All strokes in my mind are in the trauma spectrum because they're, you know, usually change your life in a very short amount of time. But the research suggests that the more unexpected your stroke was, the more disconnect there is between that story and your life story. So if you are a young person when you had it, if you had a cryptogenic stroke and they don't know what caused it, that requires deeper emotional processing than if, you know, let's just say someone was 85 and they had had 4 strokes already and they had atrial fibrillation, and, you know, I don't know, it was 101 that day and they hadn't been taking their Eliquis for a week. You can put that together into a logical story. That makes sense why that person would throw a blood clot and have a stroke. If you are, you know, 39 with no risk factors, and all of a sudden, you know, you wake up and you have a massive stroke, that is more discrepant emotionally, and your brain has to process that very deeply. So it's very important that you listen to this lecture today if that feels like it fits for you. So the higher stress levels are in our body, the slower the recovery is, not necessarily of people, but like literally if you look at a petri dish and you have some cells in there and you want those cells to reproduce, if you add a hormone like cortisol, which is that feeling we have when we get scared, you know, like your stomach drops and you just kind of feel like, oh God, you're bracing. That's the feeling of cortisol. It literally slows the recovery of the cells dividing. Okay, so unresolved emotional struggles and stress are no good for stroke recovery, okay, on the cellular level. Cognitively, I see this a lot as a clinical neuropsychologist. When we have been through an emotional trauma that is unprocessed, we haven't really processed what it means to have lived through it, you know, the changes that have happened, who we blame for it, you know, how we now find our identity. All these things we're going to be talking about in the next few sessions. Very important to give people tools to deal with that. It very much can create an internal distraction, even if you aren't aware of it, even on the unconscious level, that basically sucks up your mental energy, your attention. And when you can't focus, when you can't pay attention, it's very easy to feel like you have a memory problem. I mean, this is probably the most common thing that I see in the practice, aside from people who, you know, have clear brain health diseases, disorders, whatever. People who have just PTSD, right? No brain thing. And they come in and like, I can't remember anything. And it turns out, you know, when they were a teenager, they were assaulted and they just have tried to push it out of their mind. And it takes up space. Like, you know, think of your brain like a hotel. There's only so many rooms. And if those rooms are taken up by memories and thoughts and feelings that you try to avoid when you get triggered and you try really hard to push them out, it just takes up space and there's no vacancy at that end. There's no ability to create mental space to process things. And if you're all full, there's nowhere for those memories to go, right? So it's really our top priority to get you sleep. So you might be sitting there thinking like, okay, Dr. Sullivan, got it. You helped us understand what's at risk, why we should care. What are we going to do about it, right? How does this relate to us in our everyday life? Well, here is the problem. Research tells us that more than half of you are going to develop a new sleep problem after you have had your stroke, okay? These are the most common. Trouble falling asleep and trouble staying asleep. The first one is called onset insomnia, trouble with the getting to sleep. But for a lot of these people, once they're asleep, they're asleep. We also have the maintenance insomnia, which is you can fall asleep okay, but you have trouble staying asleep. Or there's some lucky people who get both, trouble falling asleep and trouble staying asleep. There are some times, especially after a long hospital stay, where people have problems sleeping because they get their days and their nights mixed up. This is where people sleep a lot during the day, but they are awake more often than they should be at night. Very often we also see hypersomnia, too much sleeping. The next most common one is restless leg syndrome, but the one I really want to focus on tonight is something we call sleep disordered breathing. And the reason I want to focus on it is because up to 70 to 75% of you will have sleep apnea who are listening to this lecture tonight. 75% of you, that is a lot. There are two kinds of sleep apnea that we're going to understand better in a few minutes, and both can disrupt sleep because of the frequent arousals, frequently waking up out of sleep, falling oxygen levels, coming out of the natural sleep cycle, which has 5 different sections, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 and 5 are the deep levels that we all want to get to because that's where the restoration happens, the most restorative sleep. But if you wake up in stage 3 and you fall back asleep, you don't get to go back to stage 3. You don't get to go right back to stage 4. Guess what? Back to the front of the line. You got to start again at stage 1. So many people have these little apneas, which I'm going to help you understand in a minute, and they have them right when they go into the deep REM sleep because that's when your body and your respiratory system is the most relaxed. And for a lot of people, the more relaxed their tongue gets, the more closed up their throat can get just because it's looser, less muscle tone because it's relaxed. That's when these little apneas can happen. When your sleep cycle is fragmented, forget it. During the day, you're exhausted. You have a very hard time focusing, very easy to be irritable. So this stuff really matters. So what is an apnea? An apnea is technically considered to be a respiratory event. And really what that means is for 10 seconds or longer, you either stop breathing, this is called a full apnea, or you have a 30% reduction in your oxygen levels. Okay, that's called a hypoapnea or a hypopnea, right? And so think about that for a second. 10 seconds or longer of not breathing, not 5 seconds, right? Not 8 seconds, but 10 seconds. So we're already at a pretty significant level of not breathing, okay? So remember I said there's 2 types of apnea. So obstructive sleep apnea is going to be much more relevant to you all. This is the one that after a stroke or even a TIA, 70% of you, some studies go up to 75, but on average, 70% of you are going to have this. Holy smokes, why? Why do so many people with stroke have this? Well, the research tells us that some of it is from position of sleeping. Many of you go from a bed to a recliner, okay? And that might have something to do with, you know, it's hard to sleep on one arm. You need something to help get you up and down. It's too difficult to get up and down from a regular flat bed. Some of you, there's other issues, you know, congestive heart failure can make a lot of fluid collect around people's center. And so if they lay flat, it collects much more if people put themselves upright. Sometimes people have a back injury. Sometimes their partner snores and they're out on the recliner. So sometimes it's just a matter of how your body is being held when you sleep. The other thing is that the tone in our upper airway changes after a stroke for a lot of people. We were talking last time about muscle spasticity and how, you know, in muscles that are healthy and controlled, you know, properly by the brain, there's always a certain amount of tension in a muscle, right? And when you've had a stroke and there's damage to the motor system in your brain, you can get a change in that tightness of the muscle. And that's either called tone or plasticity. So with plasticity, that's where we see people who don't have much control. Tone, extra tone, that's where we see a lot of that tightness. And you can tell because when you try to open like fingers, there's a lot of resistance there. So similar things can happen to the muscles in here. And when that airway collapses a little bit, this is where we can get the periods of not breathing. There's also plenty of people that had untreated obstructive sleep apnea before the stroke, and they just still have it, right? So untreated sleep apnea is an independent risk factor for stroke, and it's mostly because it increases your blood pressure when you have it, and again, it puts that strain on your cardiac system, okay? So some people, again, because of the muscle issues, can have a tongue that's now a little bit more floppy and can kind of fall back and get caught in the airway. People can have, and this isn't a stroke thing, but, you know, increased tonsils. Anyone that's significantly overweight, they actually look at things like neck size as a risk factor for sleep apnea. The only way that you can tell which one of these you have is by getting a sleep study. And we're going to talk about how to advocate for that later in our lecture today. Then we have central sleep apnea. This is relatively uncommon. This is when there is a disconnect between the parts of the brain that are involved in the autonomic nervous system or the respiratory network. So a lot of people who've had a stroke in the back part of the brain, especially brainstem has a lot to do with the sleep centers. they're much more at risk for stopping breathing because of a brain issue, not a respiratory issue. This can also happen with heart failure or people who have to use too much opioids. So you really want to be careful when you have any kind of brain damage about using opioids, because it's just going to make it harder for your respiratory system to work properly. We don't want that. So if you do get a sleep study, this is how they tell what you have, okay? They generate something called an AHI. This is an apnea hypopnea index, AHI. And this is the number of times in an hour of sleep that you have one of these respiratory events. And so there's a classification system. So I just think this is so interesting. So look at this: between mild, moderate, and severe. You would have mild sleep apnea if between 5 and 14 times in 1 hour you stopped breathing for more than 10 seconds. So I always think, well, what if it's 4? It's just okay to not breathe 4 times in an hour? That just strikes me as crazy. Most people that I see who have a sleep study are diagnosed with severe. So how that's classified is more than 30 stopping breathings in an hour. I have had many patients who have hundreds of sleep apneas in an hour, and that's just 1 hour. Now let's add, 6 more hours of sleep onto that, and it's absolutely crazy. So in one meta-analysis of sleep disordered breathing after either an ischemic or a hemorrhagic stroke, or in people who had a TIA, right? Remember, that's the temporary stroke symptoms that completely go away with no lasting damage. 72% of these people had an AHI of at least 5 per hour. So again, now we're back in that 70 to 75% range of you out there who survived a stroke have sleep disordered breathing. That is a problem, okay? We know that the more apneas you have, the more likely you are to have high blood pressure. And remember, that's the #1 risk factor for initial stroke and secondary stroke. And why we think this happens is because when you don't breathe, this is a crisis to the brain and the body and the cardiac system. This is traumatic. It's a threat. Not breathing equals dying, okay? So this oftentimes makes your blood vessels contract, and then we get that super high flow of blood, which is damaging because of the amount of micro tears that it's doing on the inside of the blood vessel. And we don't want that, right? We're really trying to get those blood vessels to be really healthy, elastic, wide open. That's very, very important. Of course, the other thing is when you're not getting any of that restorative sleep, the body is not able to restore the muscle cells that, go into having a healthy heart. There's so many things that happen during sleep that when we're not getting proper sleep, or we're not able to get into deep sleep because of these apneas, we never get those benefits, okay? So why do we think sleep changes so much after stroke? I can't think of one other thing in this whole 10-session group that we're going to share together where I can say that as many of you will go through a similar symptom after a stroke, right? Many people have aphasia, many people have trouble with emotions, trouble with initiation, but I can't think of anything else where I could tell you that up to 75% of you would have this symptom, okay? So why is this? Well, some of it is definitely brain. Like I was saying to you before, any back of the brain strokes put you at risk for this. The brain is also trying to work a lot harder to process everything that has happened to you. So you are naturally going to get more tired, and that's important. We want to figure out, do you have kind of normal fatigue after a stroke because your brain's just been through a lot and it gets tired quickly? Or do you have a sleep disorder that, if treated, could really enhance your quality of life? A lot of times people get new medicines brought on after a stroke, and that can have an impact. I'll tell you those in a few minutes. For our people that are in hospitals or rehabs for more than a week or two, a lot of times the exposure to sunlight gets thrown off, and that really can put the circadian rhythm out of whack, which is the very it's the cycle of sleeping and waking, that when it's light out, we are supposed to be producing a lot of alert brain chemicals and suppressing our melatonin. And when it gets dark, our melatonin should go up and those alert causing chemicals should go down. It's a very easy, simple flow, light out, less melatonin, dark out, more melatonin. But if you are anywhere, even for a few days, where you are in a room with blinds drawn, or you're not able to get out and get fresh air, very easy for that cycle to get out of whack. Stress and anxiety is huge. So again, during the day, we can distract ourselves quite a bit, can't we, with doing many things to keep our mind off of our worries. And oftentimes when we hit that pillow at night, boy, those worries come back fivefold. Very common for anxiety to disrupt sleep because there's nothing to distract us, right? A big part of being stressed out is kind of always feeling like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? I was just telling this to someone else today. After you've lived through a life-threatening event, it's kind of like your safety bubble gets burst. This illusion that everything is really okay, and that tragedies and accidents only happen very rarely, and certainly not to you or anyone you know. That's gone, right? Everything then can become a threat. And so sleeping requires that we let our guard down, and it's inherently a very vulnerable time for hours upon hours. And so there can be a lot of trouble relaxing if you've been traumatized by anything, a stroke, a person, it's all on a spectrum. And certainly different kinds of medical conditions. And I have a slide about those right here. Look at that. So I want you, this is, again, goes back to this idea of you're not just your stroke, right? We're not going to blame everything on the stroke. And we're not going to ignore all these other things it could be, because it gives us an opportunity to get you better. So here are the top things that can affect your sleeping that are totally unrelated to your stroke. Big thing with sleep, remember, is we go from being like this, which we are during almost all the day, to being like this. So just position of the body can result in a increase in reflux, in heartburn. It all depends on that valve down there in your esophagus. Is your pizza going to stay in your stomach, or is it going to creep up because it doesn't have that tight valve that's going to keep it down? Poorly controlled diabetes can really get you at night. If you have rising and falling blood sugars, you can have night sweats. You have to get up to pee a lot more, okay? It can really throw the sleep cycle off. I kind of talked about this a little bit before. Anything like congestive heart failure, any heart condition where you can get extra shortness of breath by laying down because of the fluid that can accumulate around your lungs, that can make it feel uncomfortable to sleep. Things like arthritis. If you are trying to sleep, this just happened to me the other night. My hands, I had done a lot of typing. My hands were just like hurting so much. And I was trying to think, why does it hurt so much? And I just didn't have anything else to think about. I was just laying there and I could just fixate on my hand and how bad it hurt. Kidney disease, again, this gets us back to the toilet. If you're having to pee quite a bit, obviously your sleep gets disrupted. Anxiety, do not forget, anxiety is psychological, but the truth is it's really a medical condition. We kind of like to think, we have total control over it, but there's parts of the brain that control how well we can put the brakes on anxiety. And those parts of the brain, mainly the frontal lobes, especially the right frontal lobe, when those aren't working well, we really can't help it. It just is like a broken record over and over and over again. And that's going to mess up your sleep, okay? These are the other things that we know can contribute to poor sleep. Not having a routine or a consistent sleep-wake cycle. Chronic pain or physical discomfort, not feeling well physically. Frequent need to use the restroom. And let me just say something about that since we're on that. As we get older, between hormones in us women and prostate in men and kidney issues in both of us, getting up more times to pee is normal, okay? Really, on average, probably 2 to 4 times a night is, I wouldn't say that's normal. I guess I'll say that's typical. The big thing that I want you to know is if you get up and do that and you can fall back asleep, it's not that big of a deal. The problem is if you get up and then you disrupt your whole sleep-wake cycle and then you're up for like an hour, then that's a problem, okay? So one thing that you can do, you're going to learn in a minute how important light is and controlling our relationship to light. I don't want you flipping on the bright lights as you walk through the house to get to the bathroom, but I don't want you falling either because it's dark. So, you know, low level, the lowest level, like night lights you can have throughout the house to keep you safe is what I recommend that you do to kind of keep yourself in that zone of sleepiness. The worst thing you want to do is get back into your bed and see this little thing there and be like, oh, you know, let me see what's going on with, you know, the presidential debate. Like, no, you want to stay in the zone, right? Do not play solitaire. If anything, reading under a low light is about all we can recommend. Listening to gentle music, no screens. That's the biggest no-no. No caffeine after 3 p.m. And here we go with the devices. So blue light that comes from a lot of our devices here mimics the sunlight. Our brain knows no difference. It's the exact same wavelength. What happens when the sun comes up? The melatonin goes down, the cortisol goes up. It's, you know, cock-a-doodle-doo. It's time to start the day. We don't want that. So what I want you to do is for at least 2 hours before bed, you want to avoid this sucker. And especially if you wake up during the night, do not go to that phone or that iPad. Now, I know there are some readers like, you know, Kindles that have a blue light filter. That's not the end of the world. It's really anything that has a blue light in it, okay? So remember before I said that the brain has 5 cycles, and I just wanted to show that to you here so you could kind of understand it a little bit better. So as we're drifting off to sleep, that's stage 1. This is only like 4 to 5% of the sleep cycle. This is, you're almost like a little conscious, like twilight sleep, they call this sometimes. This is where you can have those big muscle jerks, right? Stage 2 is where you're breathing and your heart start to slow down, your body temperature falls a little bit, and this is where we actually spend most of our sleep. Look at that, about 50% of the time. Stage 3 is where we're actually starting the really good sleep, the deep sleep that we all want, but it's a very short amount of time. But if you wake up during this time, remember, what do? You go back to stage 1 and you never get into 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are thought to be the most therapeutic stages of sleep. This is very deep sleep. This is where your muscles are very limited. When we get into stage 5, which is REM sleep, when the brain is healthy and the brainstem is working properly, this is where we are supposed to be paralyzed in our REM sleep. We're supposed to have no muscle tone whatsoever. That is not the case for people with REM sleep disorder, almost always coming from a brainstem issue because they act out their dreams. You're not supposed to be able to do that, right? You're supposed to have to be totally paralyzed during your dreams. But it's really the stage 4 and 5 that we want to protect in you guys, okay? But here's the trouble. We don't want you to sleep too much, right? We really want it to be on a schedule and we want it to be condensed. We don't want you catnapping all throughout the day. So too much sleep after a stroke is also detrimental and impairs recovery, mostly by the fact that you then can't put in the face time with rehab. If you're too unconscious from sleeping, you're not going to have a chance to do all those repetitions, okay? We know it also reduces your social interaction, which is very mentally stimulating. I've been known to say the best brain game is conversation. You don't have to buy any kind of a program to train your brain. Just get with people, talk with people, be interested in people. It really sets the stage for depression. So again, when you're sleep deprived, it distorts your thinking. You start to think negatively. It's very easy to see the glass as half empty, okay? It's very easy to hurt your relationships because you're grumpy and you're irritable, and then you feel like crap because you were mean to people, okay? So when we protect your sleep, we're also really protecting your relationships. I think that's a great way to look at it. Earlier, I had said that medications can affect sleep, and I know that's something that's important to all of you, so let's go through some of these. Some medications have chemicals in them that are activating, okay? Some drugs have chemicals that are calming, but these are ones that actually kind of amp the body up a little bit. And sometimes they do that with caffeine or other types of stimulants. So a lot of blood pressure medications can just kind of raise your internal activity level, make you a little too up to necessarily fall into a deep sleep. A lot of the corticosteroids, which are either for inflammation or arthritis, they have elements in them which kind of get the cortisol, adrenaline pumping a little bit. Any type of an inhaler for asthma or bronchitis or any kind of breathing problem, the way it works, how it opens up your bronchial passages is with a steroid, which kind of can get you a little bit keyed up. Any kind of over-the-counter medication that contains caffeine, and this is in a lot of decongestants. A lot of people take glucosamine for joint pain that actually has quite a bit of caffeine in it. So it's not to say you can't take these, but you might just want to time them for earlier in the day as opposed to taking them at nighttime, okay? So how much sleep should I be getting? Well, sleep experts tell us there's really no magic number. Sleep is very individual, probably has a lot to do with that genetic relationship to the adenosine that I mentioned before, and how you manage caffeine if you use that. Your magic sleep number is whatever amount of sleep you need that is going to help you feel rested when you wake up in the morning. Imagine that. I saw a meme the other day that said, imagine going to sleep on time every night, sleeping for 8 straight hours and waking up and feeling refreshed and doing it all over again. Like that was like this ultimate fantasy. I got a kick out of that. Most people do function the best when they regularly get 7 to 8 hours of pretty much continuous sleep. So like I said before, if you have to get up to pee, not the end of the world. But in general, what we're looking for is a nice block of long periods of sleep as uninterrupted as you can. Naps are okay, especially in the beginning of recovery. You might need a nap every day for 20 years after a stroke. That's okay with me. I just want you to do it smartly. So never more than an hour if you can help it, and not after 3 p.m. Once you start sleeping after 3 p.m., now you've thrown the whole nighttime, night cycle off. If someone is falling asleep and they absolutely can't help it, you try to interest them in something, you try to distract them, but if ultimately someone is falling asleep on you, what are you going to do? A lot of this that we talk about are kind of the ideals, and you try to adapt them realistically to your life. So this cat cracks me up. So the most important question to start figuring out, is this something I need to care about, to get worked up about, is just really ask yourself, when I wake up in the morning, do I feel groggy? Am I yawning like within the first hour of getting up? If you wake up tired, chances are you're really not getting good enough quality sleep. Sleep, like I said, needs vary, but you have to really go back to how you actually feel. So which of these cats are you? Are you the rested, nice little guy on the left, or are you the sleepy little girl on the right? The problem with sleep medications is a few things, but one is, boy, doesn't it seem so easy to solve a sleep problem with a pill. Wouldn't that just be great to pop a pill? I found some data just looking at older folks over the age of 60, about a third of them take medication for sleep, but a lot of people don't understand they actually aren't that helpful. And a lot of them pose some very serious risks. So I wanted to go through the top 3 that concern me so that you guys can know about them. Now, as always, I'm not telling you what to do, right? I'm a psychologist, not a physician. So these are medical prescriptions. I want you to make these decisions with your medical doctor who knows you and your history. But it's also not to say that there's never a time or a place for these medications, okay? I just want you to know that there are risks, okay? So the first one are benzodiazepines. Some people call them benzos. These are things like Xanax, Klonopin, Valium, these kind of things. Now, what worries me about this is 2 things as it relates to your brain health. The first one is you're at very high risk for falling when you take these drugs. And probably what it is people take them to sleep, right? So they take them right before bed. Then nature calls 2 hours later. They're, these medications work quick and they go away quick. So in an hour or 2, you're already full-blown affected by the Xanax. And you get up to pee, talking a lot about pee in this lecture. You get up to pee and you fall over because you're kind of a little bit out of it because of the Xanax. This is 4 times more likely to happen to you when you take a dose of Xanax, and you're most likely to break your hip. Now, yes, that sounds bad, but you might not really realize how bad it is. A hip fracture can be the kiss of death for people, many times older women. A hip fracture can get you into the hospital. You have a surgery. You might have some delirium, post-surgical confusion, agitation, pick up an infection in the hospital. You get MRSA. You have to go to a nursing home because now you got the MRSA. You can't come home. You don't really get as much physical rehab as you're supposed to get. And you never get better, or you die in a nursing home. Many people who have a hip fracture never come home from the hospital, and I don't want that to happen to you. We get concerned about thinking and memory when people take these medications. We know when someone is on them, so within that 6-hour period of when they take them, you're definitely not as sharp, okay? But there's been some good data to suggest that you are at increased risk for developing dementia the more you use them over time. And so last time I looked at the data, it was 160 doses in a lifetime that started to increase your risk. So it's not to say, because honestly, I believe that these drugs can be godsends when you need them. They are incredibly effective. It's good that they work quickly, because if you're in an agitated state or someone you love is freaking out, they're very helpful, and they go out of your system relatively quickly. They are highly addictive because of that issue. The addiction part of the brain, if anything goes on quick and comes off fast, it's like a recipe for the brain wanting more and more. But plenty of people use these drugs responsibly. And I don't want you to feel ashamed if you're someone who needs to use them, let's just say for anxiety or panic. The next one is Ambien. Again, confusion, much higher risk for falls, much higher risk for doing things you would be mortified to hear that you did. Not my favorite drug at all. But probably the worst one, and the one I want to warn you about the most, are the over-the-counter sleep drugs, things like Tylenol PM, Advil PM. The PM is Benadryl, okay? And over time, these medications take out a certain chemical from your brain that helps with memory. And it really is, if you've heard of any of the memory medicines that are on the market today, like Aricept, Donepezil, Memantine, Namenda, those are memory drugs for people with different types of dementia. And they put a chemical into your brain that helps, called choline. So what these antihistamine sleep pills do is they take that medicine, that chemical, out of your brain. So it's like an anti-memory pill. You don't want that, okay? The thing that worries me, though, is people don't take these over-the-counters as serious because, hey, I get them at Walgreens, right? They really are just as serious for your brain as any other medicine that I have on my list. I figured I would talk about melatonin because people always ask me about melatonin. In 2014, there was a meta-analysis, which we always take more seriously in science, because what it means is we've grouped a lot of high-quality studies together to figure out, with the most participants, how can we figure out how an intervention helps people or doesn't help people. And the conclusion was that they advised people to use the lowest possible dose of immediate release melatonin to best try to mimic the normal physiological circadian rhythm. So what this means is more is not better. With melatonin, what science tells us is that less is more. You want to try to find the 1 milligram, okay? When melatonin first came out, it was basically at about 10 milligrams. And then what I noticed is over time, it started to creep to 15 to 20 to even 30. And it's that whole idea, well, hey, I am not sleeping and it's bothering me. If they have a 10 and a 20, yeah, give me the 20, right? I want to be knocked out. Well, that's a problem because it's way, 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 way more than the natural amount of melatonin that your body is going to be releasing. And that's all we're trying to do. We just want you back in normal sleep-wake cycle, right? We want your melatonin to go low in the day and we want it to go high at night. And that's, for a lot of people, with kind of, more of the subtle sleep problems like insomnia, that's it. All we want to do is get you back in rhythm with your natural sleep-wake cycle. There are some benefits to melatonin above and beyond just helping with sleep. And it has been shown in animals to promote neuroplasticity after they give a sham stroke to like a mouse. So highly antioxidant, has a lot of anti-inflammatory effects. So I know right now there's some research looking at low dose melatonin after stroke, not just to help you with sleep, but to also just help with brain recovery. I thought you guys might find that interesting. So one of the things you're gonna do to apply this knowledge to yourself is to start to keep a sleep diary. And guess what you're gonna get in your email from Carrie today or tomorrow? A sleep diary. Sometimes all we need to do is monitor a behavior to change it. It's kind of fascinating. So what I want you to do for 1 week is to track your sleep, what time you go to bed, what time you wake up, how many times you wake up. Try to get a sense of how long of a stretch are you sleeping at a time. You know, how do you feel in the morning? We've got all sorts of questions on there that we're going to ask you. The other thing you can do if you're techie or if you're so inclined to make this even more objective is to get yourself a sleep watch. Probably in this whole series, you know, I recommended the mirror box if you had a symptom that would help. I'm trying to think what else. Probably a sleep watch is maybe the only other thing I can think that I recommend that costs any money, and you really don't need it, but it's pretty cool if you have one or if you can afford it. The whole idea is you can wear that when you sleep and you can connect it to your smartphone, and it tells you what time you actually fell asleep, how many times in the night you woke up, how long it took you to fall back asleep. But what I really love is a lot of them tell you about your stages of sleep, how long you were in light sleep, how many minutes of REM sleep you got. That is really, really cool. And it can actually track it for you over time. So you can get up in the morning and kind of see, and then you can compare your mood and your cognition, how you feel, you know, how much energy were you able to give in a rehab session as it gets back to your sleep stuff. I think that that's really, really interesting. But either way, just tracking your sleep will put you ahead of the game. And if you do wind up going to the doctor, you've already got this sleep diary to, you know, you're not just going in and saying, you know, I can't fall asleep, I can't stay asleep. You're like, okay, for the last week, I woke up 5 times during the night, and, you know, 4 out of the last 7 nights, it looks like I only got, you know, 20 minutes in REM. Well, that's a problem, because you need to be much more in REM sleep than 20 minutes. And now you've actually got, you're ahead of the game with the doctor to try to help them understand what's wrong and how to help you. So there's something called sleep hygiene, which is funny. This has nothing to do with getting in the shower or taking a bath. These are science-based recommendations that if you're worried about sleep, these are the first 6 things that you're supposed to do. If you have done these 6 things and you still are having a problem, then I want you to go to the doctor, and I'm going to tell you what to ask for in a few slides. But let's just go through this, because this is kind of the first place to start, the common sense things that you really should put into practice before you start getting super worried about sleep. So this is kind of the intro to what should you do to make sure you're doing everything you can within your power to get a good night's sleep. Excuse me. That was not because of bug. That was pure me. Sleeping and waking at the same time every day, you know, we don't want you to be, you know, like a robot, but try to go to bed around the same time and wake up around the same time every day. Your body wants to be in that natural cycle. So, you know, you don't want to on weekends, you know, stay up really late, or, you know, on the week and sleep in really late. You want to keep it pretty consistent. I said this to you guys before. It's really important with naps that they're not over an hour, and that you don't do them after 3. Avoiding screens, okay? So remember, at least 2 hours before bed, we don't want our brain thinking that the sun is coming up and it's time to rear up and face the day. We want to slowly try to get the brain into a less stimulated sense. This is funny. This is research-based, that you want to try to reduce the non-essentials in your bedroom. And this one really hit close to home. I don't have this anymore, but for years I had exercise equipment in my bedroom. We had a bike at one point, and we had what's the thing that you walk on? Treadmill. And really the best thing they ever did for me was dry my towels, because I rarely got on them. Even televisions are not advised to be in the bedroom, because you want to associate the bedroom with sleep, right? There's one other thing they say you can do in the bedroom, but basically for this topic here, we're talking about sleep, okay? We don't want your brain thinking when you go in that room, you're gonna go on a 2-minute walk on the treadmill. The next one, again, no TV in bed, and really they don't even want you eating in bed. Some people get into bad habits where they have a snack in bed. Water on the nightstand is okay, but you really don't want to be taking any meals in bed. And again, it's because this association. We want your brain to think bed equals sleep only, okay? If you have trouble falling asleep, we don't want you to just lay there, anything more than 20 or 30 minutes. We actually want you to get up and do something. But what you choose to do is very important. No screens, and we want it to be something that is relaxing, but also somewhat distracting. It shouldn't be anything too intense. Don't get into the New York Times crossword puzzle. Don't decide to write your sister that letter telling her, she made you mad 15 years ago. Like, nothing too heavy, just something kind of chill. Okay. Did I do all 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. All right. An hour before bedtime, I want you to do things that are getting the brain in the groove for giving up the ghost, for sleeping, okay? You need a ritual that you do consistently that starts to give your brain the message, hey, instead of being like this all day and being alert and engaged and aware, we want to start to do the other way. We want to start to wind down, okay? So less stimulation, more relaxation. So reading or listening to music before bed is ideal. You don't want to do anything stressful. Stress equals stress hormones. Stress hormones make you more alert because they want you to survive the stressor, and they want you to be able to run. They want you to be able to rapidly problem solve and respond. You don't want any of that chemical context in your body and in your brain. You just want to everything is calm, 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 calm. If you find a worry that's trolling around in your mind, one thing that really helps is to grab a pen, keep a notebook by the bedside, write it down. Again, get it out of you, right? If it's in you, it's eating you up and taking up precious real estate. If it's out of your mind, then you can get to it tomorrow. You're not going to forget it. It exists, okay? Same thing with plans. If you're like, oh God, I really got to do X, Y, or Z tomorrow. Write it down and know that you're going to be reminded of it. It's not up to you to hold on to that memory, because that can be stressful. Reestablishing your circadian rhythm. This goes for anyone that has been a little too on the phone, anyone that has been in a facility for a long time, or if your sleep is just out of whack. These are very simple, free things that you can do. This one really took me a minute to get used to, which is to sleep with your blinds open. To me, the reason I have blinds is to keep the sun out so I can sleep longer, right? And especially after having 2 babies in very close succession, all I wanted to do was have the blinds closed so I could sleep, right? But I read about this in a well-respected journal, and I tried it, and it actually really has worked. And to this day, I still sleep with the blinds open. So the idea is that circadian rhythm. Get yourself back in the rhythm. When the sun's up, you should be up. When the sun is down, you should be down, okay? The other thing is at least 20 minutes a day, I want you in the full sun. And there's something about your face being in the sun. Now, a lot of people say to me, okay, but I've had skin cancer. Well, of course, I don't want you to be at risk, but I want you to try to find a way to have a large part of your skin absorbing all of the healing sun rays and vitamin D at least 20 minutes a day. And science tells us the best time to do this is in the morning. So developing a ritual where 20 minutes in the morning, have your coffee outside, your loved one is in a wheelchair, bring them outside for 20 minutes in the morning. Even if it's chilly, wrap them up. That sun on the face is what regulates so much of the hormones that have to do with sleep. We want your melatonin to be in total natural rhythm and production, okay? Stimulating substances, you know, obviously coffee, you know, things like nicotine, especially later in the day, but, you know, even things like sugar and simple carbohydrates, anything that gives energy, we want to make that smaller, right? We want to take it away. Next one, of course, goes back to avoiding those bright lights, those screens, okay? Any of those medical conditions that I talk to you about later, diabetes, if you've got reflux, a heart condition, arthritis, kidney, anxiety, go after those hard, okay? If you think you have arthritis and there's some pain in your hips when you try to sleep, please don't ignore it. Sometimes people can feel like, well, yeah, yes, I have that, but I have bigger fish to fry, Karen. I have a left arm that's not working. Well, guess what? If we treat the arthritis pain, right, with something that's good and doctor recommended, maybe then we get your sleep quality 20% better, and then you have 20% more energy to give to the rehab, and now your arm is going to come back 20% more. I'm just using those percentages as an example. But it's these things after you've had a stroke are not little anymore. Anything that you can do that is to remove one of the layers in terms of your symptoms and what you're struggling with is absolutely worth it. So reflux, another perfect example. Some people might not take that too serious, and you know, they pop a couple Tums, and you know, after 5 years, wow, the Tums don't really do the job, but they don't necessarily go to the gastroenterologist and say, hey, you know, my reflux is keeping me up at night. I want you guys to do that. That might seem little, but it could just be that tipping point that helps sleep get more into a good natural cycle. So what if after listening to all of this, you know, you thought about it, you track your sleep, and you know what, I'm still waking up tired, then you need and deserve a sleep study. And really, there's probably never been an easier time to have a sleep study because a lot of those places have transitioned to offering them to you at home. Many of my patients are doing home-based sleep studies. It used to be that you had to go to a sleep center or a doctor's office. And, you know, of course, it's a little bit awkward. You don't want to sleep anywhere besides your own bed. But I'm telling you, for one night's sacrifice, it can change so much. Okay, so what a sleep study is you go in. A lot of times I've been in ones in local neurology offices, and they try to make it look like a hotel and try to make it comfy, but basically you're going to lay in a bed, going to bring your pajamas, bring a book, try to get cozy, and they're going to monitor your sleep. They're going to put sensors on your nose to monitor your airflow. They're going to monitor your brain activity, right? There's going to be all sorts of little sticky things on your head. You're going to have plastic sensors around your waist so that they can actually look at the amount of breath that you get in. You're going to have a little oxygen saturation thing on your finger because they want to monitor the oxygen levels. And there's a lot of wires. All of this gets transmitted back to data collection that's usually happening in the next room over. And they write up your sleep study results, and they can tell you what your AHI is. Remember that? That's the how many times in an hour did you stop breathing. They can tell you how much your legs move. They can tell you if you have REM sleep disorder. They can see how many minutes it took you to fall asleep. They can tell you if you have narcolepsy. They can tell you if you have sleep apnea, if you have, you know, restless legs. That's how you're going to figure out what a sleep study is. What a sleep disorder is versus just trouble falling asleep, right? Trouble falling asleep is more mild. You can change that with a lot of the behavior stuff I talked about. But a sleep disorder is going to require medicine or some type of a more serious medical procedure. And this is rather disappointing news, but maybe not overly surprising. After a stroke, you may have to really advocate to get that sleep study, okay? So look at this. Remember I said before, between 70 and 75% of you have some type of sleep disordered breathing after a stroke. Well, look at this. Only 6% of stroke survivors are offered a formal sleep study, and an estimated 2% only completed the testing within 3 months of their stroke. That just blows me away. That when I read something like that, I just think, The only thing I can do is go on Facebook and talk about it here with you guys, and help you ask for what you deserve on your own, because this data suggests that the doctors aren't on top of it, frankly. So do you see why I care about this so much? And I hope you do too. 70% of our community are suffering with something that's reducing their recovery and maybe is hurting them in a lot of other ways, but only 6% are actually getting the test that they need to figure this out. It's totally unacceptable. So, you know, we hope in the future that data like this helps people change the way they do post-stroke care, right? So obviously, to me, 70% of them have it. How come everybody doesn't get a sleep study after they've had a stroke? That seems like common sense to me. So these are some research-based recommendations on how to improve sleep after a stroke, okay? So a lot of this, the final one, is gonna be the most extreme. So the first one is just really trying to help your nervous system relax. You know, so much of sleeping is, you know, you can't force sleep, right? You have to give in to sleep. So doing something like, you know, guided meditations, relaxing, and there's no reason to pay for any of this. I know some people love like the Calm app, or there's another one, and that's fine if you can afford it, but I'm a big one for free is best, because, you know, you got plenty of other things to spend your money on. If you go on YouTube and put in guided meditation for sleep, there's a tremendous amount of very high quality videos out there, okay, that you can have on, you know, 10 hours if you want it on. You can have a 40-minute one just to help you get to sleep. But a lot of sleep has to do with just readying the body and calming the nervous system. So very perfect place to do the deep breathing that I taught you. Remember 4, 7, 8. Pull it in for 4. Hold it for 7. That's the hardest part. And then really forcefully blow it out for 8. And then do it all over again. Just try to do 10 of those. If you do want to get a little bit more formal in your intervention, that's where that low dose melatonin is. Okay, so 3 milligrams or less has the most research support, but what I understand is 1 milligram is probably the best of that. And again, that's to reset that circadian rhythm. There's something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia specifically, that is basically changing the way you think about sleep, because you know how if you can't sleep, you start to almost spook yourself to the point where you can't sleep because you can't sleep, because you're overthinking it, because you're thinking, okay, well, now I'm only getting 5.5 hours of sleep. And that thought alone can keep you up even more. So cognitive behavioral therapy tries to get you to think in a healthy way about sleep, so that way you don't create a bigger problem than exists on its own. I know one of the strategies those people use is to try to remember that, of course, while sleep is best, that as long as you are really, really resting and you're doing your breathing and you're calm and you're not stressed, that is also restorative. So, because especially once you know this information, it's very easy to get a little bit scared when you can't sleep. And of course, that's not how I want you to take in this information. I want it to motivate you to make it a priority for you, your loved one, and your doctors. And then, you know, prescription medication for sleep has a time and a place, but I don't want you to jump to it. I want you to kind of use it as a last resort. Okay, so what we're gonna do in a few minutes is our nice Q&A. Hopefully you guys have some good thoughts or comments for me, but we're gonna come back next Thursday, October 22nd at 4, and this is rule number 6. This is about, I really like this one, this is about increasing your emotional resilience. So what do I mean by that? That really means, like, what is the attitude that you bring to this recovery, right? There's many things you can't control in life, but our attitude, not to say we can completely control it in all situations, but I really think if we understand how valuable it is to a recovery and what does the research tell us on that, and talk specifically about what are positive ways to think. You know, if you just say to someone, think positive, well, I'd like I would like to be told specifically, what should I be thinking? How can I create an environment around myself or my loved one that is going to bring out the best of them? It's easy to get discouraged when you have a recovery that's going on and kind of dominating your life. But we want to try to find a way to bring as much emotional strength to that struggle as is possible. So now what I'm going to do, this is my least favorite part here. This is where Carrie takes over and tries to help me with getting into the Q&A stuff. So let me get back into here. There we go. All right. I wonder what you guys thought about this one. This was a lot of information in this one. Okay. Let me see if this will help. Okay, there we go. Yay, I figured it out. Okay, so here is our Q&A. All right, hey Jerry, what's up? All right, let me see Miss Heather here. Heather, I have stress dreams every night. They used to be worse when I felt awake all night, and because of my memory issues, I would get life and dreams mixed up. That can happen, and it's freaky because you start to feel like, you know, am I really in reality here? Finally got rid of that. Awesome. I take trazodone, Ativan, Prozac, and melatonin to help me sleep. I sleep through the night now, but still have these terrible recurring stress dreams. Okay, I'm so glad you asked that. That feels like a trauma thing to me, because think about it, what we know we're doing in sleep is we're replaying stressful situations over and over again to figure out how it fits into our life. So what I would say from that, Heather, is that of course, this is completely normal, that maybe you're still really on a deep level making peace with what's happened, and your brain still has a lot of running around to do with like processing and figuring out how your life post-stroke fits into your life before stroke. I hope that that makes sense. You know what's interesting about the trazodone, Ativan, Prozac, and melatonin is, I wonder, again, not a doctor, but just trying to advocate for you a little bit. You know, there's something called polypharmacy that's just like interaction effects between different drugs or taking different drugs. I wonder if you got there piece by piece, like you figured out that you needed all of those. And if so, that's fine. But of those might be interesting without knowing all of your details, right? I'm just kind of like backseat driving you right now, but like it would be interesting to see if you could go down a little bit on the Ativan and if you could still get the same good night's sleep, only because of all of those. Ativan is the only one that, remember I said over a lifetime, if you take them, you know, more than a couple hundred times, it seems like you could be at higher risk for dementia. If you've tried it all and it turns out that this is what you need, by all means, just stick with it. I just want us to be thoughtful about medications, right? I just don't want us to take things and not be smart about thinking through it. But again, by all means, if that's something that you feel, because here's the thing, and this is why these decisions are hard. Yes, there's some risk that goes along with taking Ativan long-term, but guess what? There's also risk of having chronic sleep deprivation. So we're not naive to think that it's an either or. I just always want you to be on top of advocating for the lowest possible dose that's needed, okay? Jerry says, for all that I can remember, I've never slept well, but since my stroke, I toss and turn all night. I sleep lightly. I think I get to the REM sleep maybe once a night. What about my sinus infection? That doesn't help my sleep. No, Jerry, totally doesn't help your sleep. Anything to do with breathing is super important. But you know, that's the thing. Some people just always were kind of light sleepers. I hear that from people a lot. I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum, definitely a deep sleeper. You should get a sleep watch, Jerry. I know that like you're Mr. Gadget and you've got all these cool tech things. If you don't have a sleep watch, you should just get one. I'm trying to think of a brand name of one. Just get one that tracks sleep cycles, especially light versus deep. So that way you can really get a sense of how much REM you're getting, because you actually have no idea. You would never know because you're sleeping, right? So getting a watch where you could actually look at it per night would actually be really, really helpful. Oh God, cool, Jerry. So for rule number 4, your wife got you a paint set and you stink at it. I don't care if you stink at it, man. Just doing it is awesome. That's great. You got to send me a picture of what you're making. Joe Francis, and I know I owe you an email back, Joe. I'm sorry. These last few days have just been crazy. How does a sleep study work with the trach? That's a great question. I think that they maybe just wouldn't be able to get some of that monitoring under the nose, but they could certainly get brain waves. They could certainly get oxygen saturation from the pointer finger. They could get, you know, apneas like jerking awake. I think it would be totally worthwhile to do it. I really do, especially knowing your husband had, you know, brainstem involvement with his stroke. I think that would be super, super important to get that done. Honestly, I feel like all of you guys should just get them done, especially now that they can do them at home. So how you would specifically advocate is you call your PCP or your neurologist and you can just say, hey, heard the statistic that 70% of people after a stroke could have obstructive sleep apnea. I don't feel well rested. If you snore, please include that. If you are told by anyone who sleeps with you that you stop breathing or you gasp for air in the middle of the night, those are like the 2 hallmarks of obstructive sleep apnea. And just say, you know, can you put in a referral for a sleep study? Because of COVID, you could very easily say, I'd like to do it at home. A good question I don't know the answer to is the home one as comprehensive as the office one? It probably isn't. So if you're comfortable and if you or a loved one is able to go into the doctor's office, it probably would be more of a gold standard. But honestly, why not even just start at the home-based one? This is a great comment. So Jerry says, every once in a while I have nightmares, not a lot, but ever since the pandemic, it seems more and more. Man, this topic is really important to me. So when we first started with the pandemic, I did a Facebook Live lecture in which I said, this pandemic is different for my brain health people than it is for other people. I'm sorry, it's a trigger. After a trauma, the worst part of it is how it changes how you feel about yourself, other people, or the world. Okay, so one of the ways I think traumatic stroke can affect people is it doesn't feel safe to be in your own body, right? It's like, not that your body betrayed you necessarily, but it's not safe, okay? That's one area of trauma. And then you have to figure out, how do I live my life when I don't feel safe in this body? And that's one type of struggle. If then something else happens and it now affects the way you feel about other people or the world, like COVID, right? Other people are, you know, catchy, this virus from the world, from other people could get inside me, bring me back to the hospital where I'm petrified to go, you know, make me have to be in an ambulance that I'm terrified of the sound. You know, maybe I could, you know, wind up on a ventilator, which scares the crap out of me because been there, done that. Now, not only do you not feel safe in your own body, you don't potentially feel safe with other people or the whole world. And now, talk about a trigger for PTSD. It's huge. It's really, really, really important thing to know if that's happening to you, and to really move into prioritizing your self-care and really getting some professional support. I really can't wait to get into the rules where we talk about stroke-related PTSD, traumatic stress, and like moving more into how has the stroke impacted you so we can work towards acceptance. I think that's kind of the function of nightmares and intense dreams, is to push through the resistance to get to resolution, to get to peace and processing and figuring it all out. So I really hope a lot of you will keep joining us. What's so cute to me about our group here is I feel like the people who've been with me since Rule 1 are here every single time. It's like, once I got you guys here, you know, here we are together as a group. So, you know, I really value that time, and I hope you'll keep sticking around. I am so grateful that we're able to spend this hour and a half together each week. It's usually the last thing I do in my work week. So it's a great end of the week thing for me to look forward to. Tomorrow, though, I wanted to just share this with you because I know a lot of you care about advocacy and helping other folks with stroke not have the same struggle that you had. And so what we're doing tomorrow is filming rules 4 and 5 for our local hospital foundation, the Foundation of First Health down here in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And what we're doing is we're filming this whole series so that way when folks get discharged from either the neuro unit or the rehab unit, they're going to be sent home with our guide, the interactive stroke recovery guide from I Care for Your Brain, but they're also going to get links to every single one of a video version of the rule. And this matters so much to me and Carrie because it's very important that people don't feel as alone, that they don't feel like they just got thrown to the wolves when they are discharged from the medical system. I absolutely hate that and want to do everything I can within my power to fill that gap. So the same information that we've been sharing, we're doing it, you know, hopefully for hundreds of thousands of people down here in North Carolina. So that's what I'm doing tomorrow at 12 o'clock. So I will be filling myself up with that and preparing for our next Thursday lecture, October 22nd. You just go to the website, icareforyourbrain.com/SRG for Stroke Recovery Group. Now I'm going to go, I think I'm going to have some barbecue and maybe a little glass of wine. So I'll talk to you guys later and I'll see you next week. Take care until then. Bye-bye.